What are the health effects of benzene exposure? Benzene exposure is more dangerous than most people realize because the damage often doesn't show up right away. What starts as headaches, dizziness, or nausea can quietly turn into a serious, life-altering disease years later. Benzene is a known carcinogen, and long-term exposure has been linked to leukemia and other blood cancers that can permanently affect a person's health, career, and future. In this video, we'll explain how benzene exposure happens, why the risks are so severe, and what options may be available if your health has been affected. If you want to see whether you may qualify for a benzene cancer lawsuit, contact Gianaris Trial Lawyers or use the chatbot on our website to check your eligibility right now. What is benzene? Benzene is a volatile industrial chemical that evaporates easily and becomes dangerous when it builds up in the air. It's widely used in manufacturing and is also found in petroleum-based products like crude oil and gasoline. Because benzene vapors can be inhaled without warning, long-term exposure has raised serious public health concerns. Major authorities, including the World Health Organization's International Agency for Research on Cancer and the U.S. National Toxicology Program, classify benzene as a known human carcinogen. How are people exposed to benzene? Benzene exposure most often happens without people realizing it. Exposure can occur through air, skin contact, or contaminated environments. While low-level exposure affects the general population, the most dangerous and long-term exposure has historically occurred in workplaces and contaminated sites. Acute, high-level exposure can cause serious health effects and requires immediate medical attention. Common routes of benzene exposure include breathing air contaminated with benzene, including emissions from motor vehicles, gasoline stations, industrial facilities, and tobacco smoke. Direct skin contact or inhalation on the job, particularly in petrochemical and petroleum refining, rubber and tire manufacturing, production, printing, laboratory work, gas station operations, and firefighting. Exposure from consumer products that may contain benzene as a solvent or impurity, such as paints, adhesives, furniture waxes, and detergents. Ingestion or inhalation from contaminated water or soil, often caused by underground storage tank leaks, hazardous waste sites, or industrial spills. Occupational exposure to benzene. Benzene exposure has long been a serious risk in workplaces that handle fuels, solvents, and chemical products. Many workers are exposed during routine tasks like fueling, equipment maintenance, chemical processing, or tank cleaning, often without immediate symptoms. The greatest danger comes from repeated exposure over time, which has been linked to bone marrow damage, blood disorders, and an increased risk of leukemia. Industries and job roles with higher rates of benzene exposure include petroleum refining and petrochemical manufacturing workers, oil and gas extraction, pipeline, and terminal workers, gas station attendants and fuel distribution workers, chemical manufacturing and industrial solvent production workers, rubber, tire, and plastics manufacturing employees, steel production, coke oven, and foundry workers, printing, painting, and industrial degreasing workers, laboratory technicians handling chemical reagents or solvents, firefighters exposed to combustion byproducts containing benzene, transportation and tank truck workers involved in fuel loading or unloading. Environmental exposure. Environmental exposure usually happens when benzene is released into the air from combustion or fuel-related sources, including motor vehicle exhaust, gasoline handling, and industrial emissions. People can also be exposed through tobacco smoke and cigarette smoke, which can increase indoor air concentrations and contribute to ongoing low-level chemical exposure. In some communities, benzene contamination can become a concern after fuel spills, industrial releases, or other events that affect local conditions. Health effects linked to benzene exposure. Benzene exposure can affect the body in multiple ways depending on the level and duration of contact. Some effects appear quickly after high-level exposure, while others develop slowly over time and may not be recognized until serious damage has occurred. Types of cancer linked to benzene exposure. Benzene is widely recognized as a cancer-causing chemical, and the strongest evidence links benzene exposure to leukemia. This matters because leukemia is a cancer of blood-forming tissues, meaning benzene's effects on bone marrow and blood production are directly connected to the cancer risk profile described in medical and toxicology research. Cancers linked to benzene exposure include acute myeloid leukemia, AML, other leukemias and blood-related cancers that affect the bone marrow and blood-forming system, other blood cancers and disorders that may be evaluated depending on the exposure history and medical findings. In many occupational settings, exposure may occur alongside other chemicals and mixed hazards, which is why a careful exposure history and medical evaluation are often necessary when a worker develops a blood cancer. Public health agencies within health administration and the broader public health service ecosystem, including HHS programs like the National Toxicology Program, recognize this cancer link and use it to guide safety standards and worker protections. Non-cancer health effects of benzene exposure. Not every benzene-related condition is cancer, and many people experience serious non-cancer harms that still change daily life and work capacity. Long-term exposure can suppress blood production and contribute to blood disorders and other blood disorders by reducing or damaging the cells the body uses to carry oxygen, fight infection, and clot normally. Non-cancer health effects linked to benzene exposure includes low red blood cells, anemia, which can cause fatigue, weakness, and reduced endurance. Low white blood cells, increasing susceptibility to infections and delayed healing. Abnormal blood counts and broader blood disorders tied to bone marrow suppression. Clotting problems, including episodes of excessive bleeding or easy bruising. General symptoms such as headaches, dizziness, and nausea in some exposure situations, especially when exposure levels are higher. These effects are part of why occupational standards focus so heavily on limiting long-term exposure and monitoring workers in higher-risk roles. What should I do if I think benzene exposure caused my health problems? Start by getting medical care and asking your provider to document symptoms, lab findings, and any abnormal blood counts involving red blood cells or white blood cells. Then write down where benzene was found, how exposure happened, including workplace tasks, gasoline fumes, or secondhand smoke, and whether you had repeated exposure over time. Because about half of a strong claim is proof, work history, medical records, and exposure details, talking with a lawyer early can help preserve evidence and determine whether you may qualify to pursue a case. What if you're unsure whether you were exposed to benzene? Many people with benzene-related illnesses are not immediately aware of when or how their exposure occurred. Workplace exposure can happen over time during routine job duties or in environments where benzene was present without clear warnings or monitoring. If you have been diagnosed with a condition linked to benzene but are unsure about the source, it is important to have your work history and potential exposure evaluated by experienced trial attorneys. Gianaris Trial Lawyers offers free consultations to help determine whether benzene exposure may have played a role in your injury and whether legal options may be available to you. Contact us today if you were exposed to benzene. Gianaris Trial Lawyers investigates benzene exposure claims with a focus on building clear, evidence-supported cases that hold the right parties accountable. We look closely at where benzene was present, how people exposed were put at risk, what controls were missing, and whether exposure levels exceeded what was allowed under safety standards and state regulations. We also work to connect the exposure timeline to the medical record, especially when the illness involves bone marrow damage, immune suppression, or blood cancer diagnoses, and we build the claim around the real-world cost of treatment and life disruption. If you were exposed to benzene and you're dealing with serious health effects, contact Gianaris Trial Lawyers to discuss your options. You can also use the chatbot on our website, lawforpeople.com, to see if you may qualify immediately.